This is part 2 with Jawad Hashmi. Hope you have already watched part 1. If you haven't, please do so. And remember to subscribe, share, rate, and review Light Up Pichwa podcast. Thank
Our
you.
children, even though we think that we can relate, there's going to be a big difference when the next generation comes. Because I had the benefits of a parent who speaks Urdu, who has all these traditional values, and grew up in a very conservative religious environment. These things are things that maybe people in my generation may have felt a little constrained by, but the reality is I suspect that the next generation is going to go in the opposite direction. They say that it takes 3 generations for a diaspora population to completely assimilate into its host country, meaning in 3 generations, the diaspora population, meaning us Pakistani Americans, will be indistinguishable in culture and habits and speech from anyone else, meaning our entire culture, religion may be lost. And that to me is something that's very scary. I don't think that that's a good thing. So for example, I know that, so my name is Javad. It's a very difficult name for white people to say. And that bothered me my entire life because people would mispronounce it. And Pakistanis actually mispronounce it too. They call me Javed and I've called all sorts of things. And this bothered me. And I noticed that I had some friends who had names that worked as both Urdu names and American names. So for example, my sister's name is Sarah, but she can easily go by Sarah. And that definitely has, it even has a financial aspect to it, that if you have a white sounding name, you actually get more callbacks when you put in your resume. So that is something that is appealing to me as someone who had a difficult sounding name, that every time I introduce myself as a doctor, they kind of scrunch their face. They don't remember what my name is. If I see somebody in the hall at work, they're like, oh, that's the guy with the difficult name. Let me try avoiding him because I don't want to make it obvious that I don't remember his name.
Oh, wow.
But
That's interesting.
But the point I'm trying to say is that, in a very roundabout way, but I'm trying to make the point that even though I feel this as coming from, I'm the first generation that was born here, I suspect that if we give our kids names that are completely white-sounding names, for example, Adam is a very common name that Muslims are now giving because it's, it's both in the Muslim culture as well as it can pass as in the West as well. One of the things that I fear is they may benefit from the opposite, that they have a Muslim-sounding name because they've become now so westernized that they're actually going to be like growing up when they're in college, hey, I wish I knew more about my culture that my grandparents had, but now it's too late. And so these are the kind of things that I think about. But anyways, I think we're going back to the question of, as far as my parents, and this is another thing about parents, even though I'm saying that, yes, there are certain things that our parents' generation could have done differently, even this value of filial piety, which is honoring thy father, honoring thy mother, this does not exist as an ethic in the West. It's just not something that's strongly harped on, even respecting teachers, respecting elders. These are not things that are respected in the Western culture. And even I grew up with them so that some of these things have become part of me. So, for example, I was at the mosque one day, and there was this old man who kept correcting, he kept trying to touch his feet with my feet and correcting me on how I pray. And I got really annoyed. And because I grew up in the West as an American, I'm like, hey, in my mind, I'm thinking, I probably know more about this topic. I'm studying Islamic studies, and who are you to tell me what to do? And I wanted to just give it to him. And then I remember talking about this with my wife, who spent more of the critical time of her life in Pakistan, and she's definitely more respectful of elders. And that really got me thinking that for her, she would just say, "Buzurg hai," just let him, and I realized, wow, that's something really lacking in me, that this ethic, I think about it, but it's not something that comes naturally to me. And so there are all these traditional values that I think we need to hold on to. And these are the things that maybe our parents, when they moved here, didn't really think about that when you move here, it's a lot more than just economics. When you move here, it's a whole cultural shift.
Yep.
So yeah, very long-winded way of saying.
No. That's good. That's good.
My parents did, they didn't force me to go into any career, but I would say it was the softer things they would say. So, for example, my mom would, she would say slightly dismissive things when she learned that somebody was studying something. It was in her tone of voice that, oh, wo bachara, wo to English par raha hai.
My sons don't like that if I do something like that.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to be a bichara. Like, I don't want to study. I don't want to. If I studied history, I'd be a bichara. I don't.
That's cute. I don't want to be a bichara. So, do you speak Urdu?
I do. Yes.
Okay, good.
And I actually have been studying Urdu at Harvard for the last couple of years, and just to learn how to read it. Basically.
So this all brings me to ask you, before you continue, to a question that you are valuing your culture. You want to have it, not totally lose it, right?
Right.
And where does that come from? Like some people really want to disconnect from their cultures they come from, or the language, as you are speaking Urdu, and religion, culture, all of this. Where did you get this love for all this?
So I think I've always had a love for my religion, and I think that started at a very young age with Sunday school. So I think Sunday school is very important. That is what made me the Muslim that I am today. Okay. And as flawed as it was, as problematic as it was, every 2 weeks we'd get a new teacher, new curriculum, new teacher every 2 weeks. Right. But that is what grounded me in my faith. I do think for a long time I followed that typical American Muslim line, which is to say that's culture, that's not religion, and then to kind of say that I'm going to construct religion purified from any culture. But as I started studying these things more deeply, I realized that separation is really not tenable, and that a lot of the things that are in Pakistani or Muslim countries, that's part of their culture, it's somehow related to there's a religious undertone to it. And so even though there's a lot of problematic aspects to it, there is a lot of good in it. So I did spend 5-6 years in Pakistan of my adult life, and there was plenty that I disliked about Pakistan. That in fact, my friends in Pakistan would say every day you complained nonstop about it. But I am worried about the women's rights there. I am worried about the lack of egalitarianism there, how there's a class system, et cetera. And the lack of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. All of these things are things that bothered me and which I like in the West. But then conversely, in the last few years, I've started realizing that there's actually a lot of things that's present there and that's completely missing here in the West. So,
can you give any examples?
Sure, yeah. So I think in America and in the West in general, we live very individualized, atomized lives. So it's not uncommon. So I work as an ER doctor. It's not uncommon that we have old people who die, and there's nobody who even notices that they've died. It's just the stench of the body that notifies a neighbor who's never even talked to this person, and they call the police, and this person will be brought in. Nobody knows he died. Nobody cares he died. And how do we get to that point? So whereas in Pakistan, you live in these kind of multi-family homes where everybody is living amongst each other. And honestly, having grown up in the West in California, where it was just me and my small nuclear family, I don't think I could live in that extended family situation. But when I look at it, I do see that, because my wife comes from that background, and I do realize that there are all sorts of benefits that come from it as well. So I do think that people in Pakistan and Muslim majority countries, Eastern Asian countries, are much more family oriented. So not only has the family been destroyed as a unit in the West, in America, but also religion has been completely destroyed. So we see the breakdown of kind of the social fabric. So people are freer than ever, but they're more miserable than ever. And so the depression, the mental health issues, drugs, these are all major issues because you've had the breakdown of the family unit. So those are the kind of fears that I have of if we completely westernize and liberalize and modernize without thinking about these issues, I think we run into a lot of dangers. Even though I do think we do need to liberalize and modernize to some extent, and we have to, but I think we have to go down our own trajectory of modernity as opposed to maybe what the West did. So that's
very, very good. No, this is so important. And I'm glad I'm talking to you about this. And I've been meaning to find in our community somebody who can reflect on both the perspectives. And that is not possible from anybody, just like especially from immigrant community. They can give their perspective, but somebody who is younger and who has been brought up here and have these perspectives is really, I think this is very beneficial for me as well. And I hope people will like what you're saying, or at least learn from it, or reflect on it or something. Exactly. So while you were talking, I had tons of questions coming to me. You said Buzurg, so I will just put, I'll let everybody know that Jawad meant elderly in our communities, whom we usually let go. And if they are, let's say you are at the mosque and you will, if you are sitting on a chair, you will stand up and let them sit because they're elderly and all. So these etiquettes, I think, are very beautiful. It doesn't matter modernization, and I think Islam is very modern in my view. What I have understood does not disqualify all these etiquettes, or you don't become better by not doing those simple deeds or respectful gestures to your elderly parents or other people. Anyways, so I'm not sure if we really said how do you balance that? Like if there's a young person who's you were annoyed by that elderly uncle, did you go home, discuss it? How did you come to terms with it? Like how did you discuss with your wife? But at that time you weren't married, right? You were young.
No, that happened while I was married, so I talked about it with her.
Okay. While you were married, this happened. I thought you were a little young boy, and people, So this is another thing that we can impose on anybody. As long I'm older, I can tell you what to do, Jawad. Right? that kind of. I don't know how can we balance on both sides, like the elders or the older people like me, who have young grown-up boys. So what can they do? How can they perceive the situation and handle it? Is there anything that we can learn or say something here? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, this is a tough question. And actually what I think about even is our encounter in the past where I didn't know how to address you or...
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And my wife did, right?
She knew right away. Yeah.
And that's where we see that I'm this kind of Ullu who grew up in America who has no idea about these mannerisms.
Ullu is owl, by the way, who is listening and watching.
but owl is not wise in Ullu. Yeah. Like in the West, Ullu is wise. Yes, but so it's a tough question. What I would say that in general, I think there are two sets of problems. One problem is how do Muslims who live in the West, how do they go forward? And then the other question, which I think is a bigger question, which we may not get into, but or we might, but that's how does the Muslim world, majority world, how do they go forward? So I think these are two separate questions. They're somewhat related. Yeah. I would say that for Muslims living in the West.
Thank you for watching part 2 with Jawad Hashmi. I hope you will tune in for next week with part 3. Remember to subscribe, share, rate, and review Light Up Ichwa podcast, a weekly podcast on conscious living and parenting. Thank you.